Call the subcommittee to order and want to welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on the fiscal year 2009 research and development budget for the Department of Homeland Security. This is our second hearing on the DHS R&D budget in the 110th Congress, and I hope that we'll be able to devote at least some of our time today to learning more about the department's accomplishments in the past year. So I'm glad to see that the administration is demonstrating a better understanding of the need for research and development in support of Homeland Security goals by increasing its requests for both the Science and Technology Directorate and Domestic Nuclear Detection Office. I am somewhat disappointed that many of the issues that arose during last year's budget hearing remain unresolved or only partially on their way to resolution. In spite of requests from this committee and others, this year's budget request was developed without the guidance of a comprehensive risk analysis that justifies the balance between R&D areas such as biological countermeasures, nuclear detection, cybersecurity, conventional explosive mitigation, and others. DHS S&T did release a strategic plan last year for which we commend it, and we appreciate that effort. But that plan did little to answer the questions about planning and priorities. I'm disappointed that we do not have better answers about how DHS makes important decisions about where to invest limited resources for R&D. So Under Secretary Cohen and Director Oxford have done an admirable job at integrating the needs of the mission components of DHS into their research and technology development planning. This subcommittee continues to hear complaints that outreach does not trickle down to end users outside of DHS. State and local officials, especially first responders, a crucial part of our domestic security enterprise, continue to feel that they are shut out of the process of identifying gaps in capabilities and setting research priorities. Today, I'd like to hear about an action plan for how the S&T Directorate and DNDO will ensure that stakeholders outside of DHS are fully integrated into the research planning process and that their cost and operational needs are met before any technologies are considered ready for deployment. An additional related issue that I want to discuss during this hearing is how the S&T Directorate and DNDO conduct testing and evaluation of technologies, and how the results of those tests are used to guide decisions about procurement. According to the department's budget request, nearly half the funding in the S&T Directorate will go toward product transition, and 1/3 of the DNDO funding will go toward systems acquisition. Such a strong emphasis on end-stage technology development and acquisition means that high-quality, trustworthy testing is imperative to the department's mission. Concerns have been raised about DHS testing and evaluation efforts, some of which have come under close scrutiny by this committee and others. But at the end of the day, if end users cannot trust that technology works, they will not take advantage of the many benefits we all know technology brings to the day-to-day activities of the Homeland Security workforce. Lest you think that this hearing will be comprised entirely of complaining, let me conclude by commending all of you on some successes. We discussed last year the value of basic research to the Homeland Security mission. I see that this year's budget request, the basic research investment for the S&T Directorate will reach Undersecretary Cohen's goal of 20%. Additionally, DNDO plans to increase their investment in transformational R&D. A strong investment in basic research keeps DHS S&T flexible and capable of responding to emerging threats quickly. Moreover, much of this money ends up funding academic research that helps build a skilled science and engineering workforce capable of meeting Homeland Security-related research needs for many years to come. Of course, the S&T Committee always likes to see more long-term research, but this is a good, appropriate first step. I want to reiterate that I am committed to working with the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that R&D investments are successful in reaching in increasing our knowledge of how to confront catastrophes, whether from human or natural causes. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, but there are developments that occur in real time to which we need to respond, and one of those developments is the news story and response in the Washington Post this morning, a news article on the front page delineating some of the problems that have developed with DHS technology. It was originally focused on the border fence, but it addresses many other issues that DHS works on, including airport security and some of these other technologies that we have been talking about. Unfortunately, there was a response in the back pages of the Washington Post. Mr. Ignatius quoted extensively from Secretary Chertoff, and apparently it is the Secretary's approach to point to sources external to the department as the cause of many of the department's problems. I would like to remind everyone in the room that we had a set of nudge-like hearings a year ago, kindly nudge-like hearings, which were an attempt to be helpful to the research efforts at DNDO and at the S&T Directorate. These were not classic Washington, D.C. gotcha type hearings, and they were not intended as such, and they were not executed as such. But we expressed serious concerns about whether user groups were being properly consulted, whether gaps in technology were being properly addressed, whether there was a proper allocation between basic research and applied research, whether there was too much of a tendency to fight the fire of the day rather than to have a comprehensive approach to addressing risks, and whether indeed risk assessment was being properly used to deploy limited research results. There has not been enough progress made in the 12 months between last year's hearing and today. 12 months from now, there will be a change in administration, and no matter who is in charge at the top, the crucial mission of the DHS will remain. I, for one, somewhat frustrated at the pace of progress, and would like to consider what mechanisms are necessary to ensure that in the coming months, in the last months of this administration, that we continue to press forward with sufficient aggressiveness to address the issues which were identified a year ago and which we will focus on today. And with that, I would like to recognize my colleague and the ranking member from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, for his opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Wu. I want to thank you for holding this hearing this morning to get an in-depth look at fiscal 09 budget request for the Department of Homeland Security's ongoing efforts in research and development. Our nation's scientific enterprise remains and will continue to be a critical component of our homeland security. The efforts of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office and the Science and Technology Directorate contribute to the preparedness of our nation against potential terrorist attacks and, of course, natural disasters as well. These organizations tap into the limitless creativity of our nation's scientists and engineers, leading to direct benefits for our first responders, our guardsmen, our Border Patrol agents, our police, our firefighters, just to name a few. These offices within DHS are vital components to our Homeland Security strategy, and I certainly want to thank the panel for being here this morning. I also want to thank all the men and women who work with you to bring the skills of our nation's scientists and engineers to bear to protect us from threats we currently face. You are performing a great service to this country, and you should be recognized for those efforts. Mr. Chairman, last week the full Science and Technology Committee unanimously reported the Border Security Technology Innovation Act of 2008, which is sponsored by the distinguished ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Ralph Hall of Texas. This bill acknowledges the crucial role that science and technology play in protecting our nation's borders. Today, I expect we'll hear from our witnesses that our science and technology research and development efforts are strong and they are yielding immediate benefits for our nation. However, I do know that we can continue to improve on these efforts. For the fiscal year 2009 budget, President Bush has requested over $1.4 billion for the research and development efforts at DHS. In addition to prioritizing among the various types of threats that we face, we must also consider the character of research performed. How much spending should be geared towards long-term basic research? How much towards incremental improvements to our current capabilities? So, Mr. Chairman, we also have to consider how best to defend against an adaptive and intelligent enemy who will attempt to overcome or bypass any defense we create. Therefore, it's crucial that we seek defenses that can be implemented as broadly as possible and minimize the chance that they can be easily sidestepped. I think that's what we're talking about in regard to the need to reauthorize and extend and improve the Fiscal law, the Protect America Act. Reaching this goal will require sustained attention to the operational needs of the Department of Homeland Security and continual re-examinations of the many threats that we do face. Finally, we must ensure that our substantial investments in new security technology work as advertised. Both of your agencies have been criticized in the past for incomplete or inaccurate testing and evaluation procedures. A rigorous testing and evaluation process will help your agencies in the long term by ensuring that your work meets the needs of our first responders. I applaud your efforts to immediately address these concerns and suggest that this committee is well situated to help you in those efforts. The fundamental challenge before us is how best to distribute limited funding, always, in the face of highly uncertain, varied, and changing threats. In the past year, your organizations have steadily improved our nation's defenses. There are areas, I should say, where I think more must be done in the coming year. I look forward to discussing these issues with you today, seeking ways to help you implement your effective, efficient, and evolving defense of our homeland. With that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the panel. I look forward to their testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman, and if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record. I would now like to introduce our distinguished panel of witnesses. Rear Admiral J. Cohen is the Undersecretary for Science and Technology at the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Vayl Oxford is the Director of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, or DNDO, at DHS. Finally, Mr. George Ryan is the Director of Testing, Evaluation, and Standards for the DHS S&T Directorate. Now turn things over to our witnesses, and as our witnesses know, your longer written statement submitted into the record, and your oral testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. We'll start with Undersecretary.
Well, good morning, Chairman Wu and Congressman Gingrey and the other distinguished members of the committee. It is a great personal honor for me to appear before you today along with Vayl Oxford and George Ryan. It is a great privilege for me to be entrusted with the taxpayers' resources to oversee the science and technology component of the Department of Homeland Security, and also to lead a fantastic group of men and women who are absolutely dedicated to using science and technology to make our nation safer. I will limit my words to just a very few thoughts, because I think your questions will be much more important than anything I might say at the start. But I appreciated your words, Chairman, and your words, Congressman Gingrey, on the progress that we have made and the progress that we have to make as we go forward. Your committee and the other committees, including the other body, have been very supportive throughout the year and a half I've been on board. We rapidly reorganized into a more enduring S&T construct of enduring disciplines where projects come and go, and a balanced portfolio of basic research, as you indicated, near-term product transition, and then a higher risk innovation portfolio, which only S&T has the ability to facilitate. And so I shared with you the threats as I saw them a year and a half ago. This is my third time testifying before this committee in this position. And those were the 4 Bs: bombs, borders, bugs, and business. Everyone understands bombs, borders, and bugs. The business is the cyber backbone that enables everything that we do in our society, and I know there's great interest in that. And then I told you for my organization, I had the 4 gets, and we had to get those right. We had to get the organization right, and you were very helpful with that. We had to get the people right. When I came on board, as you may remember, the Office of Personnel Management had evaluated my organization the spring before I got there, and we were ranked 222 out of 222 government organizations. So if at the end of my tenure I achieve 221, I believe I'll be a hero, because at least we won't be last. But I think we're doing a lot better than that, because we had 60% federal employees when I came on board, and today we have over 93% federal employees. I have no shortage of volunteers, and about 10 federal employees who had left my directorate in the spring of '06 have come back on board to be full members and program managers. So it's an exciting time. We had to get the books right, and this was written about in the legislation, and I'm joined today by Dick Williams, my Chief Financial Officer. We came on board the same day, 10 August 2006. You may remember that was the day of the liquid explosives plot in London, and welcome aboard, and it's been a heck of a ride ever since. And then finally, if you get the people right, you get the organization right, and you get the books right, then you can get the content right. And that has been the focus of my last year, and I guarantee you, Chairman and members, it is absolutely my focus in the transition year. And so the 4 Bs, the 4 gets, we've testified to that before. I think it brings us to a place where I'm now focused on the 4 Ps. I want to assure you that I have only 23 initiatives left, because then I run out of letters in the alphabet. But what are the 4 Ps? The first is people, and they enable everything we do, especially in science and technology. The next is process, and we've invited your members, and they've been very kind, and your staff, to come to all of our processes, whether it's the integrated product team or it's basic research reviews or field trips or our outreach stakeholder conferences. And they have been very, very supportive, as has the IG. I believe in open processes, and it is the processes and the 5-year budget and the priorities that will outlive me and this administration, as it did when I left the Office of Naval Research after 6 years. The third is partnerships, and I know, Chairman, how strongly you and the committee feel in the enabling legislation about leveraging the other components of government, international, U.S., industry, and of course our heroes, my customers, the first responders, and you've already addressed that so well. And so if we get the people right, and we get the processes in place, which I believe we have, and we have vibrant partnerships to save the taxpayers' money and not duplicate effort, in the end, you add those all up, we get product. And the product is what we're trying to get out, not only to the 22 components and directorates, my immediate customers of DHS, but also my customer, the first responders. And I know there'll be many questions on that. And so, as always, I welcome your oversight. I welcome your questions. I appreciate very much the bipartisan support that science and technology has and continues to receive, and I'm committed to you, sir, and to the American taxpayer and to the administration to do my very best to charge to the goal and turn over the best science and technology in support of making the nation safer that I can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Undersecretary. Dr. Oxford.
Good morning, Chairman Wu, Ranking Member Gingrey, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss our research and development priorities for fiscal year 2009. As always, we look forward to the engagement with this committee on an annual basis and throughout the year. Before I go into detail on our priorities for 2009, I'd like to share some key accomplishments that we've had since we last appeared before you. In December, we met the congressionally mandated goal of scanning 98% of all incoming cargo at U.S. seaports. 3 years ago, when DNDO was established, we were only scanning 22% of cargo entering through our major seaports. And when we now couple that with the fact that we're scanning 100% of all cargo coming across the southern border, we're now scanning 96% of all cargo coming into the United States for radiation. We've also equipped the U.S. Coast Guard, all their boarding teams, with radiation detection equipment so they can have a multi-mission capability. To address other threats, DNDO supplied Customs and Border Protection with additional handheld detectors, and as of December 2007, CBP is now scanning all international general aviation airplane arriving in the U.S. We're also implementing a program to enhance physical security of high-risk radioactive sources in U.S. medical facilities. Our programs that support long-term research have also been very successful. We have seen tremendous involvement on behalf of the national laboratories, private industry, and academia in DNDO research efforts. I'm proud to say that these programs are already yielding some very promising results. As an example, our advanced technology demonstration with the Intelligent Personal Radiation Locator, or iPERL, is expected to be complete in 2009 and transition to systems development in 2010. This program is based on user needs for a next-generation personal radiation detection system and will be used by first responders, law enforcement, and the counterterrorism communities. Our academic research initiative awarded 22 grants this last year and currently supports over 70 graduate students in nuclear and radiological research areas. This year we're hosting the first annual Grantee Conference in April to showcase research and foster academic collaboration. FY 2008 and 2009 will apply additional $26 million in follow-on grants and new awards to the academic environment. This will help develop the nuclear scientists and engineers of the future. Our DNDO research philosophy is very broad. Our work spans both near-term and long-term transformational concepts, as mentioned by the chairman and the ranking member. In our case, it is driven by DNDO's architectural analysis and by user needs. We translate gaps in the detection architecture and associated user needs into specific technical areas to define our research agenda. We use pilots to integrate existing or developmental systems into operational concepts to refine capabilities for the radiological and nuclear detection missions. DNDO does provide a wide variety of products to our state and local partners. These include handbooks on how to use equipment and how to operate the radiation detection mission. We provide training for those that are equipped with radiation detection devices, and we also provide them with preferred equipment recommendations for use in their grant process. And finally, we provide a 24/7 technical reachback capability for all state and local users. For technical needs that exist beyond current capabilities, we have a robust transformational research program that aims to do several things. First of all, fulfill new mission needs, to reduce system cost, to increase technical performance against the full spectrum of radiological and nuclear threats, and demonstrate, evaluate technology to transition to systems development. Our transformational research program has three key benefits. It yields new promising detector materials and concepts. It focuses the U.S. technical community and industry, national laboratories, and academia on the highest rad nuke detection priorities. And finally, it is beginning to reverse the trend in nuclear expertise pipeline through our academic research initiative and forensics work. DNDO's research efforts are underpinned by sound system engineering processes and an extensive test capability we will talk about today, and allows us to evaluate systems against realistic threats and in operationally relevant environments. Our tests not only evaluate the technical performance of systems, but also involve our customers. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, DNDO's 2009 budget reflects a concerted effort to address vulnerabilities and needs. The challenges that lie ahead require a coordinated effort on behalf of the best scientific minds in government, academia, and the private sector. We have made good progress, but much work remains to be done. We're anxious to work with the committee as we go forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Director Oxford. Next, Mr. Ryan.
Good morning, Chairman Wu and Ranking Member Gingrey and other distinguished members of the committee. I am George Ryan. I'm the Director of Test and Evaluation and Standards under Secretary Cohen, and I'm honored to appear before you today to discuss DHS test and evaluation. The DHS S&T Test and Evaluation Standards Division is working closely with the DHS Undersecretary of Management as well as all DHS components to develop and implement a robust test and evaluation policy for all of DHS that will be fully integrated into the department's acquisition policy. The T&E policy that is being developed will require user components to participate in creating, reviewing, and signing the Test and Evaluation Master Plan. The primary purpose of the Test and Evaluation Master Plan is to describe the necessary developmental and evaluation and operational test and evaluation that needs to be conducted in order to determine the system, technical performance, operational capabilities, and limitations. The TEMP is an integrated and agreed-upon plan to ensure that the right tests are conducted and the products are meeting the user requirements. DHS ensures independent operational test teams are involved early in the project development to ensure that operational shortcomings are identified and correctly as early as possible during development. The test results will be critical in ensuring that DHS products meet the necessary milestones to continue development or deployment. The DHS components working within the DHS Capstone IPT process ensure that the user needs are addressed in research as well as the test and evaluation. End user needs are incorporated in the planning and design of the test. All tests will be performed to component requirements or DHS adopted standards. Reports of efficacy, safety, and suitability are assessed against the criteria which are developed with component input. The Test and Evaluation Standards Division is also developing an accredited and recognized test capability with the goal of testing all products in an accredited or recognized facility. The accreditation recognition process is under development and facilities are currently being identified that are capable of conducting different aspects of the testing process. The Test and Evaluation Standards Division has an effort underway to ensure that once testing is completed, both components and first responders have access to product performance evaluations as well as their limitations and capabilities. The T&E results will be placed on the responders' knowledge base, which is an online system that is funded and managed by FEMA. And I wait for any questions you may have. That's the conclusion of my remarks.
Thank you very much. We have just been called for 2 votes, and it's my view that perhaps taking a break at this point and coming back to the questions may be the better course of action for then we will temporarily suspend the hearing and we will reconvene after these 2 floor votes. Thank you very much. Thank everyone's forbearance for dealing with these floor votes that just kind of, they're like ducks. They fly when they want to, and they just kind of come and go. We are in our period of questions now, and members will have 5 minutes to ask questions, and the chair recognizes himself for the opening 5-minute period. Undersecretary Cohen and Director Oxford, at their hearing a year ago, one of the concerns that I expressed, and I was hoping that you all would make some substantial progress on this, was having a defensible way of developing priorities for your research. And I want to return to that subject to inquire about how you currently determine which research areas become funding priorities, because in this fiscal year or for proposed FY09, biological and nuclear research receive a lot of funding, have high priority over other important areas, such as explosives, which have been a commonly used device in terrorism, over cybersecurity, and there are uncorroborated reports of penetrations of both government and private sector computers, other infrastructure issues. What we discussed a year ago was whether there should be a system of formal risk analysis, informal risk analysis, or other methodologies to determine research priorities. And I'd like to know whether you have undergone those processes to set your budget priorities, because there are other uncorroborated reports that the Vice President cares about some of these things and not about others. So I'd like to know if you are performing risk analyses over our society, economic damage, human threats, or whether it's a bolt out of the blue coming from the White House or the Vice President's office that's setting these research priorities.
Well, Chairman, first of all, I think it's a very wise concern on your part and the committee's part, and I did hear you and I did take action. It is not a bolt out of the blue. As I came on board, as you know, in the summer of 2006, and I reviewed what had been done since the stand-up of the Department of Homeland Security, it appeared to me that in the research area, about one-third of the budget, about $500 million, was going to nuclear radiological, about one-third was going to chem bio, and about one-third was going to everything else. And I don't know what the basis for that was, but clearly the administration of the Congress and the appropriators had at some point over a couple of years agreed to that. Secretary Chertoff feels very strongly, and he's testified to this, about risk-informed decision-making that should generate grants, which are not S&T, but also everything else we do, because I think it was Goethe who said, if you defend against everything, you defend against nothing. And so your question is absolutely on the mark. Where we are today, and Vayl will talk about his area, radiological, nuclear, and his funding. As you know, I've been bringing down the chem bio area as we've been delivering product, the BioWatch 2, and now we're getting ready to prototype BioWatch 3, et cetera. And we've had a chance to analyze the other threats, which you have so right, cyber and explosives, and a wide variety of others. Our Infrastructure Protection Directorate has 17 critical infrastructure protection areas, and they have done the detailed analysis, the societal and the economic impact of low probability of occurrence but high consequence effects, many of which regrettably are on the West Coast. And so it is a work in progress. Following our discussions last year, and in keeping with the Congress' desires and Secretary Chertoff's focus on risk-informed decision-making, and I'd like to enter this for the record if I may, I sent a letter to Dr. Cicerone, who is the head of the National Academies, and asked for his help in 4 areas. This letter addresses 2. One is help us determine the science of risk-informed decision-making. Just like after World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic, strategic bombing, we developed the science of operations research, operations analysis. And it's quite mature today, and we're able to use it in a very good way. We have actuarial tables today for just about everything. It sets our insurance publicly and privately, but it's really history and probabilistically based. What we don't have is a good understanding of when bad people want to intentionally do bad things to perfectly good societies, bridges, railroads, water systems, etc. Now, in my area, and I salute Dr. John Vitko and Mark Chem Bio Group, they took this on with looking at 30 major threats. And I'm not going to give all of them, but you know it's anthrax and botulism, etc. And they took the probability of occurrence, this predates this letter, 0 to 1, very small number, and they took the consequence of occurrence of a pandemic, millions dead, billions lost. You multiply them together, you get a number. That's the beauty of math. But when we stressed that number across all 30 of these pathogens, we found that the variability was plus or minus an order of magnitude. What does that mean? It means the answer that we got, if it was 10, if the number was 10, the real answer was 1 to 100. That's a span that's very difficult for us to decide how to invest. But the surprise to me, and that's why I went to Dr. Cicerone, is while each one of the 30 answers had that variability, we saw clusters. We actually saw a high-risk cluster, a medium risk, and a low-risk cluster. So this is a work in progress. It's not going to be solved this year. It may not be solved this decade, but I think working together, these are not bolts out of the blue. These are not bolts out of the blue. And I probably could make a joke about the vice president, but I'm a member of the administration, so I won't. But I did want to share this with you. This is Jay Cohen's view of life, and then I'll end. It's the likelihood of occurrence versus the consequence of occurrence. Lower, higher, lower, higher. You'll notice I have nuclear off the page on the right. The consequence of occurrence would be devastating. But today you have to either steal or buy a bomb, today. Don't know how long that'll last, to make that happen. But you'll notice cyber, the probability of occurrence and the consequence is the highest because it's happening to you and I right now. Someone's trying to steal our identity, as well as all the other issues that are going on internationally. Now, you can agree or disagree about the position. It's PowerPoint. You can move them around. But this is where, with the help of the national academies, we're trying to do that. And finally, as I look at my 6 divisions and I look at my 12 capstone integrated product teams and where we should invest for the customer, I don't generate requirements. My customer does, and the Congress does, and the administration does. I provide solution opportunities. And when I think that we're investing too much in chem bio, not enough in cyber, I go to what we call the Technology Oversight Group. In the department that is the Deputy Secretary, the Undersecretary for Management, and the Undersecretary for National Preparedness, NPPD. They get to vote. I make proposals on how we should move money in the budget generation process, and the components then get to make their reclama. No, don't take from me, take from someone else. So we have a formal process that now is a year old. We just went through the TOG, Technology Oversight Group, review. We made adjustments for the FY10 budget that I think are consistent with your concerns. And with that, I'll end. And Vayl, I apologize.
My 5 minutes have expired, but Director Oxford, I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer that question. Also, Undersecretary Cohen, perhaps offline between our staffs, we can drill down into the mechanisms that are actually used to connect the assessments with the budget priorities, because it is important for us to understand what it is that you all are doing and have some confidence in that, and I'd very much like to have confidence in that. Director Oxford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, using your term bolt out of the blue, this was not, it was, DNDO was actually created after almost 2 years of discussions within the executive branch. It started in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 when people started looking at other potential vulnerabilities and risks to the country. We tried to do this across the executive branch in kind of uncoordinated ways for a couple of years to find out we were not making the progress necessary to help make this nation more secure against a nuclear terrorist attack. So the interagency came together and decided we needed to put together the business model, the office model that we have with DNDO to put together a concerted effort against the nuclear attack. We were asked to put together what we call the Global Nuclear Detection and Reporting Architecture as part of that. That effort takes stock of all the efforts across the U.S. government dealing with the nuclear threat. Takes into account what Department of Energy, Department of State, Department of Defense are doing overseas, whether that adds to our overall layered security or not, and then looks at the domestic dimension to figure out what we need to do domestically to enhance our overall security. So from that, We do not spend a lot of time on actually specifying details of the threat. We assume somebody in time will want to do something harmful to this country from a radiological or nuclear perspective, and we can't wait for the precision of the intelligence community to say it's there before we take prevention action. What we also reflected upon is most of the efforts in the country were based on response versus prevention, and as Undersecretary Cohen said, if you put your stock in responding to a catastrophic event as opposed to preventing it, we thought we had the math wrong. Not that we shouldn't be doing emergency response actions, but we need to be putting our stock, in this case because of the catastrophic nature, in the prevention piece. So as we looked at prevention, we started to look at the critical aspects of vulnerabilities. And as we worked this along with the Congress, there was immediate priority put into border security in terms of trying to keep things from transiting across our borders, at our land borders, our seaports. And in my opening statement, I mentioned we've made tremendous progress now, and we are scanning 96% of the cargo coming into this country. The rest of our architectural analysis is starting to identify other potential vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. I also mentioned that we're now scanning international general aviation airplanes coming into this country, because that is a very quick way, fast way, using Undersecretary Cohen's term, if somebody can get their hands on an existing nuclear weapon, within hours you can get it into this country. So what we're doing is we're addressing those other critical vulnerabilities beyond our port security, beyond our land borders, to address those. That then helps drive the research agenda that we put together to make sure that we can have the capabilities in place to enhance our ability to detect and interdict along those various threat pathways.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before I ask my question, I want to request that the letter that Admiral Cohen referenced that he wrote to the national academies be put in the record as part of the permanent record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Director Oxford, your testimony today described the need to address gaps in the current architecture and develop solutions, or quote, solutions that can effectively counter a determined and mobile adversary who will seek routes to bypass existing security measures. That was your quote. Yet in the fiscal year 2009 request, it includes a $60 million increase for acquisition of the Advanced Spectroscopic Portal, which is, I understand, a fixed location system meant to upgrade our current capabilities at our ports of entry. But meanwhile, research and development funding is kept relatively flat from the prior years, $334 million in 2009 compared to $324 million in 2008, so a meager $10 million increase. I mean, a very small percentage, although $10 million is a lot of money. So the question is, why is the upgrade of current generation portal monitors more important than development of new technologies to close the current gaps in our detection system? Are we, in effect, putting locks on the front door but leaving all the windows wide open?
Thank you for the question. It's interesting. That's exactly the same kind of perspective the Secretary has on this, is that we need to make sure that we are looking not only at all the other windows, but we need to look at the back door and everything. We think we've got the balance right. I can't go into all the classified details of why the upgrades are necessary, but I will tell you that we know some of the current systems are vulnerable to critical aspects of the threat, and we'll be glad to share with you that offline in terms of what those threats are. Our test program have shown the vulnerabilities in the current deployment, the systems that are deployed out there, and it's a critical aspect of our vulnerability we need to address, and the new systems will allow us to do that. Secondly, it allows our Customs and Border Protection agents to be a lot more effective. Just to give you some information from LA Long Beach, the biggest port in the country, right now with the current systems, they're getting 400 to 500 nuclear alarms per day. They've assigned almost 200 customs officers to deal with that phenomena at LA Long Beach alone. These new systems have the promise to bring those down to 20 to 25 serious alarms per day, therefore giving CBP the opportunity to address a wider variety of the mission space that they've been assigned.
And so what percentage of those alarms are false alarms?
Right now, all of them. And so what we need to be able to do is distinguish that, reduce the operational workload, but also enhance our overall ability to identify the threat so they can pay attention to the serious.
Sure. Would you repeat that, the number per day that are all false alarms?
Right now, 400 to 500 nuclear alarms per day at LA Long Beach.
Wow.
And we get roughly 200,000 at our seaports alone on an annual basis, 200,000 alarms that then have to go through the full adjudication process to make sure that there is not a threat contained in that primary alarm. We get another 40,000 at our land borders, and that's based on 2006 deployment numbers, and our deployment of systems have gone up since then.
Describe a full adjudication process.
Sure. Let me use a seaport as an example. As the ships are unloaded and the cargo containers are put on trucks, they go through primary screening where we have a radiation portal monitor that has the capability to detect but not identify what's in the cargo. So if it alarms, it merely says we have the presence of radiation. That vehicle then is pulled over into what we call secondary screening. It goes through another radiation portal monitor to make sure that that alarm was valid in the primary. At that time, if it alarms, the customs officers go through a second handheld screening process where they take a radioisotope identification system, a handheld detector. They screen the vehicle again. This device has some capability, although we understand its limitations, to be able to take a spectra to identify what the nature of that radiation is and whether it's something of consequence or something that is totally benign that's normally in the environment. And there's a list of critical isotopes that then have to go into another process where that spectra is sent to laboratory science and support within CBP to do further analysis of that spectra. This can take upwards of hours. So now when you've got a situation like LA Long Beach with 400 to 500 of these a day that may go through that process, you see there is a possibility not only to, based on the limitations of these systems, to miss a threat, but also then to slow down the conveyances through the ports. So there's a combination of purposes as why we need to do the upgrades that you asked for. Meanwhile, a lot of our R&D and our transformational work is addressing the other basis of the vulnerabilities that I talked about that are in the architecture right now.
My time's expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being with us today. Let me start off with my comments by saying that although there's been much frustration by members of this committee and the public, I think in things we have not been able to accomplish, we would be neglect, though, in not acknowledging the fact that since 2001, there has not been a attack, on our soil. And so the work that you've been able to do to provide Homeland Security for us is obviously there. And so for that, we should all say thank you. So I wanted to preface my comments by acknowledging that fact. A few quick comments, and if you could answer them quickly, because the rules here is the red light comes on and we're only given 5 minutes. And since I'm a freshman, they hold me to it. So if you could help me with it, I'd appreciate it. Number one, Mr. Cohen, Undersecretary Cohen, in your testimony, it mentioned a database of unmet human needs after Hurricane Katrina. And when I asked staff here, did we have a copy of what that database was, no one had it. Could you provide it to this committee in the future?
Absolutely.
Okay. That was great. We're doing good so far. Second question, Undersecretary, you also mentioned in your testimony that with the University Scholars and Fellows Program, you now have instituted a policy to require 1 year of service in a Homeland Security related field. I would respectfully request that you reconsider that, and let me tell you the reasons why. I represent an area just adjacent to the ports, so 45% of the entire nation's cargo does go through my district. However, I would tell you, though, unfortunately, in my community, we're not always abreast of some of these programs and job opportunities and internships, et cetera. And I'll give you an example. I recently participated in 2 congressional delegations, and I didn't see anyone who looked like me who was there working on behalf of the foreign services and the folks who were supporting us. And so to leave out young people who clearly, I think this is going to be one of the key areas where we can have gainful employment for our young people, I really see this as a deterrent and something that could hinder other youth in opportunity to participate. So I would respectfully request that you reconsider this requirement and take it away.
Congresswoman, first of all, thank you for your service as a teacher. I don't know if it was harder with the ADD students in the school or in the halls of Congress, but I'll leave that up to you. Let me tell you that you and I are in absolute full agreement on the face of America and where we need to go. And as you are aware, last week, after a year's process, we went ahead and we announced the 5 new University Centers of Excellence with co-leads for research and education. And I'm pleased to tell you, of the 11 schools announced, 5 were minority-serving institutions, 3 HBCUs, 1 Hispanic-serving institution, and 1 Native Hawaiian. At the end of the day, I want, and it is not now, but it will be, our university fellowship and scholarship program to reflect the face of America. That's what I did at the Office of Naval Research. You do that by putting out a very broad net. Having said that, as a taxpayer, and I will end because I respect your time, at the end of the day, the fellowship scholarship program I inherited was not aligned to our centers of excellence and was not meeting the requirements of the enabling legislation, which has me develop the workforce for Homeland Security. And oh, by the way, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, so important to our economies, including Long Beach and California. And so the payback and the internships, et cetera, are a work in progress. I've taken no hard decision there, but I'm not a giveaway organization as I read the enabling legislation and what you would like me to do for the country with the precious taxpayer dollars. But I am committed to equal opportunity and to the diversity that's critical for the future of this nation, and I believe I have a track record there.
So are you saying you will remove this requirement?
I will consider it, and I'm glad to discuss with you or your staff how I achieve the goals mandated in the enabling legislation for the Centers of Excellence and for STEM and Homeland Security workforce development through student programs.
I didn't want to use my time to go to this extent, but maybe it appears that I need to do so. I'm a student who was an athlete, and I had a chance to get into UC Santa Barbara based upon an EEOP program. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that's an equal opportunity program. And I would put my record against anybody in this room. And so it is critical. I cannot stress to you enough how important this issue is to me and to other members in this Congress. We do not have, all children do not have the same opportunities. All children do not have the same access to AP classes. All children do not have the same access to various languages. All children do not have the same access to the precursors, the prerequisites that might be required as they look for this other employment. So I would say to you, Mr. Undersecretary, until we can have that equalizing force to discriminate, and I would use the term, to discriminate against giving young people an opportunity to appropriately qualify is a very serious issue for me. So I would like to continue this discussion if it's going to be needed, but my request, and if necessary, I will bring it before the Tri-Caucus, my request would be that this requirement would be removed.
If the chairman would just indulge me, I'm a product of the New York City school system. I did not come from rich folks. I went to the Naval Academy, and I was required to pay back 5 years in service, which I did with great honor. It dragged on to be 42 years. There are many programs in the federal government where we require post-graduation of payback for the taxpayer's investment. I may be misunderstanding you, and I don't want to take valuable time. I'm glad to meet with you, and if I'm misunderstanding you, there is no pre-qualification. What we're asking kids to do is to be involved with our DOE and national labs as rising juniors and rising seniors so we can expose them to what we're doing, encourage them to come into that workforce, which desperately needs revitalization.
So this is a post requirement, not a pre-requirement?
Oh, I wouldn't have taken all this time. Absolutely. There are no prerequisites. The prerequisite is merit, just as you indicated. But I'm not hard over yet on 1 year. Maybe the right answer is 2 years. Maybe the right answer is 0 years, so long as we have a robust rising junior, rising senior, summer intern program that I pay for. But what I inherited was a system that I couldn't look you in the eye and justify the expenditure for payback. So I apologize, Congresswoman. I think there's no light between the two of us. There's no pre-criteria. I apologize.
And I appreciate that clarification, and that's perfect with me. Mr.
I-
Chair, could I just close with one last comment?
Please.
Thank you. You're very kind. I appreciate it. Mr. Undersecretary, it's my understanding that in terms of staffing, we have this whole idea of the one face at the border, and that is becoming quite an issue because the one face does not necessarily have the expertise, in particular with the agricultural requirements. And so, if not at this meeting, because I've extended my time, and as a freshman, my red light is on, so I got to stop. So I would just ask that you could prepare for this committee a better understanding of where we are, because I'm hearing that there are concerns in the field with that issue, that the expertise is not there, particularly on the agricultural end. And given the fact that I do represent the largest area in the nation, it's of great concern of us. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentlewoman. If you were a 20-year veteran, the red light would still be on. But I dearly appreciate the gentlewoman's passionate pursuit of the issues, and I thank her for her background and service, and the Admiral, Vice Admiral. We are all a product of our backgrounds, and it is a strength of this nation that we bring these different perspectives to make sure that our society can capture all the human talent which we can bring to bear for these very challenging times. And the chairman, recognizing himself, just for a moment touching upon an old issue, Director Oxford, your eloquent answer was perhaps a lengthier way of saying we have a very deep risk, and we haven't done the risk analysis, but because it is such a great risk, we're allocating the resources that we feel we need to address that risk. Perhaps we, at a staff level, we need to circle back around to see whether that is the right thing to do, because as serious as that risk is, resources that are allocated there are not allocated, say, to Nunn-Lugar, which is a different solution to the problems that you are trying to address, or resources addressed there are not able to be redeployed to other, perhaps equally significant hazards to our society and to human life. I'd like to shift to a different ground, which is the integrated product teams, the IPTs, that the Undersecretary has implemented with some success. And this is a question directed really at all three of our witnesses here. My understanding is that there has been success in bringing the IPTs together and addressing some of the concerns that different parts of DHS has about the technologies that we're working on. But I am concerned about whether the IPT process reaches out far enough into the testing process, into the end user community, so that their concerns about validation first, next using these products in an operational environment and maintaining them in an operational environment is reflected in the IPT process when we are setting research and development goals.
I will give you a very succinct answer. I do science and technology, and that is the principle of what I do. In law, I am also, this is not an S&T responsibility, it's a separate responsibility, the test and evaluation executive for the Department of Homeland Security, a job I'm very comfortable with, and George Ryan and I had that same job for 6 years in the Department of the Navy, much larger budget. And I characterize test evaluation as we're not going to buy no junk, and it must be independent, and you understand that. In S&T, I get to take risk in order to keep, with millions, hopefully intelligent risk, to keep from putting billions in acquisition at risk, because acquisition is and should be risk adverse, whether it's in industry or it's in government. And so the integrated product team has been a very good step forward to bring the customer, Coast Guard, Border Protection, et cetera, with their capability gaps. They don't tell me what technology to invest in. They tell me what their high priority mission needs are. I offer them solutions, universities, laboratories, U.S., international, or if they have a preferred solution from a provider, just give it to me. We do a technology readiness assessment, because I'm not going to buy no junk, and if it measures up, I'm glad to resource it.
Well, Mr. Undersecretary, the groups that you listed are part of DHS.
Correct.
And the question is whether you're reaching out sufficiently, say, to the fire department of Peoria.
Sure. And the short answer is I need to do a better job, because the enabling legislation said the 22 components of my customers, but also the first responders, state, tribal, local, et cetera. In the integrated product team, you'll see on the bottom of each of the diamonds is the user. The user may be an agent. The user may be a first responder. I just asked Rob to pass to you the challenge that I have. Unlike DOD, where I just had Marines and sailors, I now have the customer and the customer. And so we have different transition paths that go to first responders, go to agents, et cetera. It was my intent in August of '06, as I put in place the organization which you all very kindly, rapidly approved, to have in my interagency and international liaison, so I didn't duplicate what any other component of government was doing and brought international partners, to also have first responder liaison. And because I have to deal with the Sheriff of Maybury and I have to deal with the New York City Police Department, I can't handle that scale. But I can deal with the Fraternal Order of Police Chiefs and the fire chiefs. They understand the scale issues. And so I wanted to have that capability. I was advised that because the department had state and local, because the department had an outreach, and because the first responders had indicated they felt there were too many entry points for DHS, and it was confusing, that I needed to deal internally to get those inputs. I think I may have taken that too far, and that's why, and it was adjacent to Congresswoman Richardson's district in January, at the invitation of California, we had a first responder outreach conference. Several hundred first responders were there. The mayor of Los Angeles participated, et cetera, to do exactly what you said. But I've got to formalize how I bring them to the table, not just in the requirements generation and satisfaction, but also with George, as we do in the Navy. We don't allow contractors to load the missiles onto the plane. We bring in fleet sailors, because at the end of the day, they are going to be loading the plane, and we'll figure out how to do that better, and we'll do that this year, sir.
I have gone past my 5 minutes, but Mr. Ryan, if you could address some of the testing components of this, and Mr. Oxford, if you have anything to add. Have you pressed the microphone button?
Excuse me. Let me address. Yeah, there was. I'm only using you for foresight, but the wisdom of Congress when they created enabling legislation to put T&E and S&T, and then the foresight of Undersecretary Cohen to put standards and T&E together, I think is very good, because the T&E now, and I was with the operational test leaders from industry, the government and industry last week, and that was an issue in DOD, is because of the interest in accelerating the cycle time of getting things deployed, they feel that they need to be more involved in the laboratory end of it, which they are currently not in DOD. And gee, here we're right where they want to be, so to speak, because we can see what the requirements are early on. We can determine that the requirements are testable. And then with the IPT and with standards, we can support the standards. And I'll give you a good example that I think touches on many things that you had in your questions. I was in Eastern Kentucky. I went to both Somerset to see the NIM Center, and then I was in Eastern Kentucky, and they were doing UAVs, and I got into a discussion about standards of UAVs. And I came back and said, for the many micro UAVs that first responders don't want to have, and there were actually some policemen at Eastern Kentucky when they were flying these, they, if you look at it, there were no standards. So what we did is a combination of the standards group, and Bert Corsi, who's here, is the department's standards executive. We got with in this case, we got with the Navy to work on test protocols to support the standards once they get development. And we also have NIJ involved, and actually at the NIJ meeting we had the other day, there were people from the Texas Association of Sheriffs. So they're all working together to develop these standards and test protocols to support that. From the IPT process, we're involved in the ITP process. So early on, we are meeting with, even though it may be internal, we're meeting with the users and the developers, again, to understand the technology, to get a better feel for what instruments and test capability are needed actually prior to testing, so we can budget for it and make sure it's there when you get to the point of doing the testing. So I think we're making a lot of progress in the right direction. Hope that helps.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. I'll try to cover the two facets of your question. First of all, our customer base is federal, state, and local. We have a little bit different model than the Undersecretary does. We have embedded in DNDO representatives from TSA, CBP, Coast Guard. So we have within the cross-section of our DHS customer base direct liaisons working with us every day. So we have a pretty good conduit of getting capability to our federal partners. From the outset of DNDO, I established a state and local affairs office with the entire intent of broadening the awareness of the radiological and nuclear threat at the state and local level. We have conducted now 7 workshops. We'll have our 8th workshop in April, where we bring in state and local representatives from across the country. In some cases, we've had 30 states represented as part of that interchange. We're enhancing their awareness. We're talking to them about how they can enhance their own security within their metropolitan areas and their state environments. Then we work with them on the grant process as appropriate so they can get capabilities, and then provide the requisite training that goes with that capability. On the test side, do you have a question? On the test side, when I inherited this responsibility, there was almost no test capability in the radiological nuclear detection area, so we've kind of grown that from whole cloth. Some of the criticisms that you've seen in the press and elsewhere suggest there needs to be more independence in the tail end of our process where we're dealing with the operational side. What the Undersecretary and I have agreed to do, along with the Deputy Secretary, is Mr. Ryan will now become part of our independent operational test entity, where he will review test plans, he will look at the adequacy of those test plans, and ultimately on that operational test and evaluation piece, he will be signing off on the test report. So we're negotiating an MOU right now that should be done next week that will put that into perspective.
Well, Mr. Oxford, even more briefly, is that process working around New York City and what you're trying to do there?
We have seen tremendous capability grow from our engagement in New York City. What we have seen is the secondary benefits of 22 different jurisdictions working together just in the radiological nuclear defense area. It is starting to expand. For example, New Year's Eve when they put together...
Let us continue to follow and track that process.
Absolutely.
And let me recognize the gentleman from Georgia.
And Chairman, if I may, as you remember, the Environmental Measurements Laboratory of New York was a big concern last year. And Vayl and I went up there, and we have leveraged that incredible intellectual capital who have expertise in nuclear radiological to work with DNDO. In fact, Vayl is paying for 8 to 10 of those people in direct support in the tri-state area for what he's doing in test and evaluation.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have one last question, and Mr. Oxford, you don't have to take the full 5 minutes. I'm already 2 minutes late for my next meeting. In your testimony, you described your support in developing, well, actually, it was Undersecretary's testimony, but developing a coordinated interagency R&D roadmap that would enhance the breadth of domestic nuclear defense efforts through the Office of Science and Technology Policy's Domestic Nuclear Defense R&D Group. What is your expectation for the completion of this roadmap?
As far as I know, Dr. Marburger has now approved that roadmap. I don't know if OMB has endorsed it for follow-on budget deliberations, but the road mapping activity is complete.
Admiral Cohen.
Yes, sir. As you know, we were required in the enabling legislation to come up with a coordination document. At that time, DNDO and S&T were one unit. I delivered to the Congress at the end of last calendar year something that had been in progress for a long time. It's that coordination absent the nuclear roadmap, and Dr. Marburger now is doing the integration to put it into one roadmap. My challenge there was the enabling legislation wanted me to have a little bit more leverage over the other departments of government, and they were not as enthusiastic about letting me do that. So it is truly a coordination document, but at least we've laid out what their capabilities are, and what the nation's needs are, and now we'll use leadership by embarrassment to get the desired result.
Great. Thank you, and I'll yield back my time. Thank you both.
Dr. Gingrey has expressed that he has no objection to me asking one more tranche of questions, even with no Republican supervision in the room. At first, I just want to touch upon the issue that each of you all, whether it's in the testing arena or research in certain specific areas, whether it's building safety or other topics, or nuclear detection, there is a lot of expertise over at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I think that I will ask the staff offline to inquire as to each of your operations, how much interaction, how much cooperation there is between your efforts and the expertise that is available over at NIST. The last question that I want to focus on in this hearing is that Mr. Undersecretary, you have done a commendable job of raising the amount of basic research to invest about 20% of research funding in basic research. I just want to make sure that for budgetary purposes, that the definition of what is basic research has not been shifted in order to reach that 20% mark. Is this the same definition that has been used in prior fiscal years? And if there has been a shift in definition, what are the differences between the current definition and the past definition?
One of the things I've learned in this town, Chairman, is to always tell the truth. I do it for two reasons. One, it tends to work, and at my age, I don't have to remember what I said. So there is no bait and switch. I have not redefined, and I'm not using Washington.
And there's the
math.
problem that others tend to have long memories, too.
Yes, sir. And paybacks are heck. But the facts of life are, and I say this as a citizen, today we don't have Bell Labs as we knew them. We don't have Xerox PARC. It is only the federal government and their deep pockets and their tenacity that can make the sustained investment in basic research that has given us the technology and this incredible economy that we enjoy, whether it's the Vayl Act or so many other things the federal government has done. And so in Navy, when I was asked to make sacrifices in the budget, I said, take whatever you want in transition, but don't take a penny of the basic research. We did not have a robust basic research portfolio when I got here. We have established that. It's focused on the universities. It's focused on laboratories. I define it as 8 years or more. We have a chart right here, because I believed you were going to ask this, Mr. Chairman, which shows by division the purple by division shows the percent of their research dollars that go into basic research. You can see in explosives, because I can't detect at range a suicide bomber or a suicide car today. We've got plenty on the output side. It's being used in Afghanistan and Iraq, but I've got to get the phenomenology. Photon packets. I don't know what the methodology is. I need a discovery. Half you see in explosives. Whereas in Borders Maritime, it's small. Command and control, I can leverage everyone else in government. So I don't want to double spend those monies. I am using the definition from OMB, there are a lot of definitions at the end of the day, but it's university, laboratory-focused, unfettered, and long-term. And I'm glad to work with the committee. The committee staff has been involved in all of this process, and if I don't have it quite right, we'll certainly make adjustments. But I think I've spoken honestly, sir.
I want to thank all of the witnesses for their participation today, and I want to assure everyone that at a member level, at a staff level, we want to continue to work with your agencies to assure that we are properly focused, spending the taxpayers' money wisely, and taking care of their long-term interests. I thank you for your participation, and the record will remain open for additional statements and questions for 5 days, and we will be sending additional written inquiries to each of you. Thank you very much, and with that, this hearing is adjourned.